Are you troubled by strange noises in the middle of the night? Do you experience feelings of dread in your basement or attic? Have you or your family ever seen a spook, specter, or ghost? Do you believe in UFOs, astral projections, mental telepathy, ESP, clairvoyance, spirit photography, telekinetic movement, full trance mediums, the Loch Ness Monster, and the theory of Atlantis? If the answer is yes, then don't wait another minute. Fire up that email and contact the professionals at If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Our courteous and efficient staff is on call 24 hours a day to serve all your supernatural elimination needs. We're ready to believe you. So drop us a line at bishopshomegrown@gmail.com and check out all of our online services at thealchemistcabinet.com. The world is a confusing place, filled with all manner of shimmering distractions that take our conscious mind and our immortal souls and subvert them into the most basal of human emotions. Can any one of us who considers ourselves a spiritual being truly look around the carnival at the barkers, performers, and the caged animals and believe, even momentarily, that any of this is as it should be? My name is Alan Bishop, the alchemist of the Black Forest of Indiana, distiller, historian, occasional tinker, reenactor, and your host of If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Have you ever noticed the world isn't quite what it presents itself to be? That something is just a little off kilter, just a little out of focus. Perhaps that movement you caught out of the corner of your eye was more than a shadow, that weight on your shoulder more than fatigue. I have lived my whole life like this, aware, awake, and waiting for the next experience, positive or negative. Always apprehensive, always analyzing. I believe that spiritual warfare is real. I believe from societal observation that others are becoming acutely aware. I believe that many are being influenced by forces unknown in a negative and spiritually deprived way. I see soft disclosure in every corner of pop culture. Join us as we pull back the curtain, as the veil thins, and reach with us into the ether to reclaim the truth on If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Hey guys, welcome back to If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. And we've got another really interesting special guest tonight, someone else that was sent this direction by JJ Rose, who I greatly thank for helping this podcast out, because as I've mentioned, it's not always easy to get guests on this show, and trying to slowly grow it into something a little bigger than what it had been when I originally started the whole thing out, and to get a little bit more into some of these in-depth spiritual, metaphysical, esoteric discussions, and not just so much only, you know, the ghost stories, the high strangeness, all that stuff. That's all part of the same thing as far as I'm concerned. But we've got a guest tonight that I think is going to take us on a really interesting journey. Someone you may have heard on other podcasts in the past. Very, very intelligent, very involved in his art and all of the lessons that he has to share with humanity. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to him because, as always, I like my guests to actually introduce themselves. Otherwise, it's just me rambling for an hour.
Hi, everyone. My name is Charles Stevens. I often go by the nickname of Chucky Danger. I got that from a near-death experience, and I wear it proudly.
Very cool.
I am an amateur researcher into Sasquatch, and I have been led onto a journey that was quite unexpected. where it took me into the realm of ultraviolet light. And the discoveries that I've been making while doing that have been phenomenal and totally mind-blowing. And it opens up so much possibility for how the world works around us, and it takes us out of the mundane of the human experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been awesome in general as well, getting to kind of talk to you once or twice before now as well, Chucky. You can always tell when somebody really knows what they're talking about and is really interested and has really done the deep dive on things that they're talking about. And so often on these kind of podcasts, there's a lot of filler, and I'm not pointing out anybody in general, but there's typically a lot of filler. People need content, right? Your stuff is not filler. And talking to you just the time that I did through Zoom and hearing a little bit about topics, that I know you've talked about on podcasts I've listened to, as well as a topic we're getting into tonight with this UV light thing and Sasquatch. By the way, shout out to Andy Kasperzak, who I'm pretty sure has just been waiting the entire time during the show for me to do a Sasquatch episode, so this will make Andy happy. I have to bring him on to rant about Sasquatch on another episode in the future. We have never done a deep dive on Sasquatch on this show in any way, shape, or form. And I know Sasquatch is only one part of this UV story that you have, but I think that this will open some people's minds to some aspects of that phenomenon they've not ever otherwise thought of or even considered potentially. So
Correct.
I know the little I've heard of it certainly opened my mind to the extent that I went and bought a UV flashlight. So congratulations. You should be getting your Amazon commission check any day now.
There we go. So I think I'll start off by talking about some of my actual Sasquatch experience. And a lot of this was peripheral. Like, I've never actually laid eyes on a Sasquatch, although I've come pretty darn close with how things have played out. But I mean, they're forest ninjas, so good luck actually seeing them most of the time. And a lot of what happened is kind of like hindsight's 2020. You don't realize it was Sasquatch until afterwards, and you start listening to other podcasts and hearing other people's stories that are telling the exact same story, and then you realize, oh, hey, that's what that was. So I'm a small town homeboy, and I go camping in the same kind of area all the time. And me and my friends have a spot that we love to go to as teenagers, and it also happens to be the same area that me and my dad go hunting in all the time. So I'm in these woods a good chunk of the year, not just in hunting season, but in the spring, summer, fall, and sometimes a little bit in the winter, although I've never had anything happen in the winter time. So the first real experience I had, we were camping down at a lake that's at the bottom of the hillside. And me and one of my good friends decided we were going to go spearfishing for the night. So we made up our own homemade spears, just cut some willow trees, sharpened them into a sharp point, and decided to do stupid teenager stuff.
Caveman stuff.
Yes. And so we took our flashlights and we're waist deep in the water, and we're looking for those sucker fish that are supposed to be in the shore. And there's a stream that's running off the mountainside that filters right into the bay there. Everyone else was sitting around the campfire and having a good time. It was just the two of us out in the bay. So it was actually pretty quiet. And while we were out there, we started to hear this snarling growl that sounded a little bit like a wild boar. The problem with that is we don't have wild boar here in British Columbia, and it was such out of the normal for both of us that we had no idea what it was. It gave us the heebie-jeebies, and we didn't like to feel vulnerable being waist deep in the water, so we decided to amscray back to the campsite and stick around everybody else.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
after listening to a whole bunch of Sasquatch Chronicles, I realized that a lot of people describe hearing Sasquatch do the same kind of growl, like a mix between a wild boar and a gorilla. And that's kind of what we heard. So looking back, I thought maybe there was one up the creek that didn't like us fishing. They tend not to like fishermen very much either.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suspect people hearing you say that as well, there are people that will hear this and go, I heard something once when I was hiking, something that they've completely forgotten about that they couldn't explain at the time. And, I've certainly heard my fair share of strange things out in the woods, different places, and you can't put your finger on it sometimes. And why is that? But just something unsettling, and especially something you don't know what it is. If you grew up in the local area, it just sets inside your stomach and lets you know, okay, there's something weird is going on here, something not right,
something out of the normal.
Yeah, and potentially that infrasound thing as well is a possibility. Giving you that gut feeling, there's something there that you're not hearing, some auditory frequency that you're not hearing, but you're picking up on as well. So
exactly. Now, the next experience happened just up the hill from there. My dad and I have a spot on the hillside that we hunt for white-tailed deer, and it's extremely steep, and it benches off 3 or 4 times, and every top of the bench, there's a heavy deer trail. During the rut, the big bucks will run up and down there, and they're completely concealed from other hunters because nobody wants to walk down that steep hillside and then back up again, especially in the thick bush. So I was curious to see how many of the big bucks are actually on that hillside. So before hunting season, I went down there with my trail camera. And I knew bears can smell the batteries in trail cameras. They smell like an ant colony. So I put the trail camera really high up in the tree, probably like 7.5 feet, and I angled it downwards towards the trail with some wood as a wedge, just so I can see the deer and not be catching just treetops moving. And I left it out there for about a month. So I come back with my best friend, and we're excited to see what kind of pictures I got on my trail camera, because this is the first time any of us have ever used a trail camera even. And I get to the tree where it's supposed to be, and the camera's gone. And all that is left is the nylon strap that was buckled to it to hold it to the tree. The buckle had been snapped, and it was just hanging on by a thread on some bark that was there.
Wow.
So I thought someone stole my trail camera, and I got really angry. But I logically was like, okay, in case it is an animal, I need to do my due diligence and look around the ground here for this trail camera. So I start doing circles out in a pattern, up and down the hillside until I got about 20 yards down the hill. I found it, and it was lying face to the sky, right beside a fallen over tree. And the weird part here is the case was open. There's 2 latches that you definitely need fingers for to open in order to open that case up. And there was no claw marks, no teeth marks. It was just intact, facing the sky, and nothing was wrong with it. I think it took a picture of me when I looked at it.
Wow.
When I took it back home and I observed the pictures that it took, the very first picture from the day after I set it up was a little bit of hair in the corner of the frame that was long and horsehair like, but I couldn't see anything more than that. And then I got a couple pictures of sky, and then nothing. So whatever did this did not come in front of the camera. It approached from behind, grabbed the case, ripped it forward off the tree, and then took it down the hill out of the way of the walking path. So super curious, definitely not a human, because they would have just stole it. or taking the SD card. And not normal animal behavior. So that one I didn't need to retrospect on. I thought that one was just weird right off the bat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some things just kind of stick out there for sure.
Yeah. The next big event was the next valley over from that. We went camping one May long weekend, and we were definitely the first ones up that forestry road because we were still plowing through unmelted snow in some parts, and there was no tire tracks, no skidoo trails, nothing. And we get to this campsite on a nice big lake. It was nice and private, and you have a 200-meter trail to the next lake beside it, and all through this skunk cabbage swamp. And it's super beautiful out there. And we did dumb teenager stuff. We were playing loud music. We were shooting potato cannons across the lake and having a good time fishing. And we stayed out there for 3 or 4 days. And I think on the third night, I told everyone right around dusk, let's quiet down the music for a little bit. I'm going to do my owl call and see if we can't talk to any owls that are out here. So we quiet down the music, and I go to the edge of the lake, and I do an owl call. And I get a response right away across the lake. And so I call back, and it responds again. And then another owl kicks up on the other side to the right. And I'm like, oh, there's more than one. That's really cool. Keep calling, and eventually there's another owl on the backside of the lake, and then another owl to the left. And they're all talking amongst each other, and then another owl. And then 2 or 3 at the next lake over start piping up from a long distance away. All in all, there was about 12 owls talking all at once. And that's not normal. Now, the very first owl that piped up, after this whole cacophony of owls is talking back and forth, gets really excited, and it breaks into this chimpanzee mixed with a kookaburra type chatter. Just really excited. And it made one of the girls there really afraid, to the point where she's like, you need to stop this. And, I just thought it was a stupid owl at first.
That makes you wonder if she's had some experiences, or, again, I talk about this a lot on the show, but genetic memory,
Yeah, so. Could very well be. So I stop, everything quietens back down. We go about our business and don't think much of it. Later that evening / early morning, most everyone had gone to bed, and there's 3 or 4 of us just sitting around the campfire, kind of having heart-to-hearts late into the early morning. And there's a gravel parking lot right behind the campsite where we parked all our trucks, and we could all of a sudden start hearing running across the gravel, like really fast. And this really gruff, guttural that ran right up to us, and then nothing. Mm-hmm. We turned around, it's super afraid, and we couldn't see a thing. We bust out our flashlights, and we're looking around the parking lot, and we ended up waking up a few people, and they were saying that, something had been dragging against the side of their tent, and we didn't know what to think of it back then.
I'm not going to lie to you, dude. Just the guttural noise. So there's been a few times I've heard things very similar to that, but even just hearing you describe that just then, and I rarely on this show do I ever have these feelings, but I got a cold chill from that. Just the memory of having heard a noise like that before in places where they're clearly, by my visual spectrum, there was nothing to see.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it raises the hair on the back of your neck. So we just thought it was like some deranged coyote or a wolf or something, although it definitely sounded like it was running on 2 feet. And after listening to Sasquatch Chronicles, I heard story after story after story of Sasquatch imitating owl calls.
Yep.
And there was one particular episode that sent cold chills down my spine. And the guy described the owl call the exact same way that I did. It sounded like a mix between a chimpanzee and a kookaburra. And when he said those two names together, I was like, oh shit, no way.
Well, this is right there too with here locally. I'll throw this in for you. So I haven't heard so much on the owl calls, but you will often hear people that have any kind of encounter with those things talk about hearing Bob White quail calls. Oh. But it's almost like they can't do the second part of the whistle just right. There's something a little off about it, a little broken, a little frequency broken, that when somebody hears it that's been hunting their entire life, they know that it's not a Bob White quail. So
yeah, so I'm pretty darn sure that with the noise that we were making, we probably ticked off a clan. And that was the alpha coming in to say, hey, you need to leave. Mm-hmm. I mean, nothing got violent. There was no disturbance of our things or any of that. No rock throwing or wood knocking or anything like that. It was, for the most part, pretty peaceful. But it definitely caught your attention.
Yeah. 3 days is time to go. They're done with us. I don't know what they are, but it's time to pack up the stuff and get out of here for sure.
When we were playing around at the neighboring lake the next day, there's a little skidoo cabin that's right on the edge of the lake there, where you can stop and warm up your hands in the fireplace and then keep on going. Mm-hmm. And there's a logbook in there that everyone likes to sign and date when they were there and maybe leave a little note for the next person. And someone had wrote, I don't suggest staying here. We had bears circling the cabin all night long. But bears don't do that. I mean, we have a ton of black bear here in British Columbia, and some places a lot of grizzly bears, but in most places they're few and far between. And the black bears are more afraid of you than you are of them. Mm-hmm. I mean, they see you and they'll just take off running. They're not going to come in. Yeah, especially when you're shooting a potato can and playing loud music.
Yeah, they're not like raccoons. They're not just, they're not wandering up to your picnic table and asking you for food. So yeah. Any kind of, just to be clear as well, if a bear was behaving like that, any kind of animal, a dog behaving like that is enough for me. Thank you. I'll just stay away. I'm good.
Yep.
So.
And then, so I put that in my back pocket of memory, and it, like, again, when I heard the Sasquatch Chronicles episode, I was like, okay, that's definitely what that was. 2 years ago, I went out hunting right around the same area or not hunting, I was sighting in my rifle. I had ordered a special scope and it got to me in the mail late. And so it was already October, in the middle of hunting season, and I needed to go zero it in. And so I waited for Friday that I had off at the time. And I waited until about midday so that the morning hunters could have their fair chance at a hunt without me disturbing them shooting my gun. So I got out there about noon. And this is right up the hill from where that trail camera was ripped off the tree. I found a nice hillside where I could see the backdrop, so I know where my bullet's going. I put a cardboard box on the hillside with a stick-on target, and I'm comfortably just out there shooting by myself. I think I was actually listening to podcasts as I was shooting, so I was more than preoccupied. And after I had shot about 10 rounds or so, I am looking down my scope and I start seeing this big cedar tree just whipping back and forth on the top of the hill, like violently shaking. So I put my gun down and I'm looking up there with my binoculars, and it's the only tree up there moving. There's no wind, but it's flailing back and forth. And there's no road to get up there. It's an old grown over clear cut. And I can't think of an animal that would come in to do something like that around a 30-06 being shot. Like, that is a very loud gun, and anything that hears one shot is going to head as far away from there as possible, let alone 10 shots, and then still come in to shake a tree. And it definitely wouldn't have been a person doing that either, unless they're really stupid. But the strength alone to do that is phenomenal.
Absolutely.
Even though I had that gun in my hand, I did not feel brave enough to walk up to the top of the hill and see what was happening up there.
Man, I don't blame you. I do not blame you.
So I think I took 1 or 2 more shots just so I could finish, and very spookily went to grab my target and got out of there. And I left it alone for the rest of the season, basically. I didn't want to go anywhere near there. So I went back in the spring because I had talked about it a lot with my friends, and I wanted to get a good picture of that tree. I wanted to know how thick it was and what exactly was going on in that space. So I walked up there and I got photos of where the tree was. There's a whole grove of little cedarlings at the base of this tree, so even if I did go to the top of the hill, I wouldn't have been able to see anything at the base of that tree. So that kind of put my mind at ease, so I wouldn't have seen anything if I tried, unless I walked right up to it, which wasn't happening.
Nope. Hard pass again.
And while I'm just playing around in the clear cut, I'm looking around at deer sign, and I find this rotten tree that is on the ground, and a moose has made a bed out of it. So I'm looking at the moose sign there, and I notice there's a clear, well, not a clear, but there's a footprint in the middle of this moose bed, and it's a barefoot humanoid footprint. So I get my camera out and I'm looking around at it, and it's about 14 inches long. You can see the heel pretty good. You can see the big toe, and then after that it was a little harder to see because of the substrate of the material it was in. There's not a chance I could have cast that track. It's not like a good dirt track where you can just pour it in and have it work. It's rotten wood.
Yeah.
But that was some good corroborating evidence for what happened with the tree shake earlier that year. So, you know, they're there. It's just a matter of time and chance running into them. I went to a Sasquatch conference after that, and I was telling this story to the local BFRO agent. And I never told him exactly where this was. I never gave him a location. I just told him my experience. And after we had talked for a while, he pulled me aside. He's like, if you ever want to see a Sasquatch, go to such and such a hill, right beside such and such a lake, and sit on a lawn chair, and you'll for sure see one there. That's probably about 5 kilometers away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like, it's not far at all.
Yeah.
So I have all this evidence in that one little area. And just this past hunting season, I was out keeping in mind of feeding patterns of animals, because they got to eat something. And you can look at the willow trees on the side of the forestry road, and you can see the level of browse where the deer feed. You can see their chew marks on the ends of the branches. And then you can see above that where the moose feed, and they can only reach so far. And you can see the chew marks on the ends of the branches where they're pulling off the soft tips. And then above that, there's branches on the willow trees that have been stripped bare, but not by chewing on them.
Mm-hmm.
They almost look like they've been pulled off.
Just pulled.
Yep.
That's interesting too, because I'm gonna throw two things in here for you. So, you've listened to the Trickster episodes and all that stuff, and I intimated in there that sometimes things still happen on the farm, but so we have quite a few apple and pear trees on the farm for distilling, and I don't spend as much time up there as I did because working full time and a good little ways away from home. There was a pear tree, and I guess I just come to like take things for granted. There was a pear tree kind of out in the field away from my mom and dad's house, and it hadn't really been bush hogged that season, so the plants or the hay was 5 foot tall, and there was a real heavy game trail there, but it was a real wide game trail. Almost looked like, you'd almost have to have 2 or 3 deer side by side running through there. And it came right to this pear tree, and it was a Seckel pear, so they come on here in June. I mean, they're real early, little bitty pears, super sweet. But that tree, the whole top of it, it was loaded with pears. And me and my buddy DJ, who's been on the show as well, we're gonna go pick them one day. And we walked over to that tree, and it's kind of an eerie feeling, anyways, because you haven't bush hogged around anything, so you're looking for snakes and everything else. But the top of the tree was stripped of pears. Nothing on the bottom had ever been touched. But the top of the tree and the top of the tree had been broken as well. Now, a fruit tree will break if it gets too much weight on it, but these are little bitty Seckel pears. Right. There's no way, even being loaded, that the top of that tree would have broke. And it wasn't just broken, it was broken and twisted. So, again, I'm always hesitant with the things that happen on the farm to attribute it to Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Grassman, whatever you want to term it. Just because to me it comes off as more of a trickster energy than anything else. But certainly was some weirdness there, and DJ definitely, he was done with that tree. There was no going back to that tree. Let's not go check it out. None of that stuff. The other one that you made me think of, so the tree shaking. So in the same area where in the Trickster episode, my wife and I talked about the thing that I shot, that also happens to be part of my maple syrup camp now. And it's also a place where I often find morel mushrooms at. And about 2 years ago, I was in that area. And I always do this thing. I'll stop at the edge of the woods and I'll ask for permission to enter the woods. I always do it every time, even though it's my property, 100%, well, shared with my cousin. I will always ask permission. And I went in and it just didn't feel quite right. And this was probably April, the year the leaves had just started to bud out or whatever. And I heard something that sounded like something was falling in the trees sort of off to, I guess it would be the southwest of me, maybe 50 yards away. And I turned and I never really saw anything. And I know that this is going to sound familiar because there's been stories like this, for example, on Sasquatch Chronicles. But there was definitely something, and it's almost like it slipped. Looked like it jumped from one tree to the next. And it looked to me like it slipped. Whatever it was wasn't huge. It wasn't massive. But when it hit this other tree, you could hear it hit the branch, and then it looked like it started falling through the branches. And at first I thought, well, the top of a tree fell out or something because it's storm season. There could have been something up there. But then you just see one branch, almost as though something grabbed it, and the branch bends, and it stops. And it stays like that, and then everything went quiet. And again, I got out of the woods, and I went home. And I was good for a while. And
that is the smart move to do.
Yep. Don't want anything to do with it. Good. It's cool to see that sort of stuff every once in a while, just to remind yourself that there's something weird out there. But I'm glad that it doesn't happen on a continuous basis to me, at least not like it did. So
yeah. So after my experiences there, I started to really question what would logically make this thing exist. And anyone that knows Sasquatch knows there's two camps. There's the woo camp and the physical Aper camp. And I don't think that there's a definite deviation between the two.
Yeah.
You can't throw out any evidence, no matter how you feel about it.
I agree.
And I kept hearing stories about these glowing red eyes or the eye shine. And that stuck with me. And I was like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense because, obviously predators will have eye shine. So that would make sense. A primate doesn't necessarily have it, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just something we haven't learned yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I started looking at other creatures in nature that have the ability to not only see in the dark, but create their own light. That's where I started. So I started looking at things like bioluminescence, and I went onto the flashlight fish. They have this little pouch right below their eye that have symbiotic bacteria in it. And they can control it just like a flashlight. They can turn it on and off. And they use it to distract predators and also illuminate the seafloor in order to see food. So it sounds like that would be a beneficial thing for the Sasquatch if they're actually illuminating the eyes. So I got that idea into it. And then I'm like, well, it's bioluminescence. What kind of a light form are they actually picking up at nighttime when the sun's down? And a lot of these nocturnal creatures are picking up the leftover ultraviolet light in the atmosphere. A spectrum that we can't see, but everything else around us is operating off of it.
Mm-hmm.
And digging really deep into this, I found out that every single living cell on this planet emits ultraviolet light in some frequency or another.
Wow.
So right now we are actually emitting ultraviolet light ourselves, and our bones are probably the easiest way to see that light. If you get a photomultiplier that is strong enough, you can see red-brown light being emitted off of our bones, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So I got pondering that, and I thought, well, Sasquatch is seeing ultraviolet, then obviously they're seeing our clothing, because you think of the nightclub scene, and when you're underneath the black light, your clothing starts to glow in funky colors if you're wearing the right pattern.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, that must be the dead giveaway. That's definitely how they're seeing us. It's this ultraviolet. And then I started looking at animals and how they fluoresce under the ultraviolet light. And I realized that there's this whole other level of communication that's happening that we have no clue about. It's such a new science that it's only being discovered recently.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you take a mundane animal like a flying squirrel, and they look like a little gray-brown squirrel to us in the daylight. But you put them in the ultraviolet light and they will fluoresce pink and orange and blue. They got all kinds of fancy colors. And they use this to see each other and do mating displays. Like, it's phenomenal. You start looking at the vegetation and that will fluoresce too. So you go up to a fir tree and you put the ultraviolet light on it, and all the little lichens that you can barely see on the bark will glow bright neon orange.
Wow. Huh. What about something like and this is just my curiosity as much as anything, but something, you often hear in paranormal terms, something that's blacker than black, that sort of thing, right? But let's just take like a common animal that's black, like a crow or a vulture. I would suspect, even being as dark as what they are, there's obviously a little bit of a sheen to their feathers anyways, that there would be some interesting effect of ultraviolet.
There's a little bit of iridescence on them. So, for instance, a black bird. So the starling, I know for sure. They're often considered a trash bird on the farm. I actually like them. But if you put the ultraviolet on a starling, that black on them actually turns rainbow. They are every single color. Just absolutely phenomenal the way that birds can communicate with this. Another really cool thing is owls. So if you take an owl from 3 different regions, you take one from your hometown, one from the next town, and one from the county over from that, and you stretch out their wings and you put the ultraviolet flashlight on them, the flight feathers will actually fluoresce in different patterns depending on the region that they come from, so that they're able to tell where they belong, they're not going to inbreed, and they can communicate with, hey, this is me.
That's interesting for sure. Yeah.
Like, there's so much that we have yet to learn about why they do these things and how they're doing these things.
And I think even just to throw that in there as well. I mean, you can have the conversation about whatever level of intelligence humankind is at, or whatever level we think that we're at versus what we think of animals. But, clearly in these everyday animals, there's a little something extra happening that we're not catching on to.
There's even forms of bioluminescence that is not in a visible spectrum to us. And even the most primitive of creatures, like the earthworm, will bioluminesce in ways that we don't understand yet. David Attenborough constructed a special camera in order to capture this. And the earthworm will glow like a neon blue color. And when the average garden variety beetle comes up, they're usually a predator, and they come up to bite that worm, as soon as they bite it, it brightens up tenfold. This worm will go super bright blue. It's almost like it's showing its pain.
Yeah.
Which makes you wonder why fishing with earthworms is so effective.
And it also makes sense, because of course I would, because why would any hillbilly not have done this? But I raised worms for years. I had a greenhouse full of them that we use for compost. And, they have a little blue sheen to them anyways. But the other thing they'll do when they get into a stress response is they will immediately secrete more mucus. And that mucus is very high in nitrogen, which makes them taste bitter to anything. And so I'm wondering if there's an electrical response tied to that coloration plus that release of that liquid. And I seem to recall maybe at one point in time, and maybe this is a little down the rabbit hole, maybe you've seen this or this, I seem to recall that mucus, at some point in time, that I read something or saw something that it had a slight bioluminescence to it, like when they go through and they're making their tunnels as they're eating, what they leave behind.
Oh, that it would light the way?
That it has a little coloration to it.
That would make sense.
So,
the way mammals survived the KT extinction event is we went underground, and since our bodies are able to produce ultraviolet light, we stayed alive when there was no sunlight on the surface. So we went underground, and that's why you find cities like Derinkuyu in Turkey, where it can house 20 to 40,000 people, including livestock, and they would stay sealed up underground for years until the sunlight came back.
That's interesting. Yeah, for sure. I mean,
the light we actually produce is more powerful than what the sun produces. And it takes energy more powerful than the sun produces to achieve faster than light travel. Which makes you think for a minute.
It does. It certainly does.
So really, we are built in with the power to travel time, but we have no way to activate that at the moment.
No way to access it. Yeah, get to it. That is definitely That's definitely a deep philosophical conversation to have, and why we can't access it at this point.
There's no such thing as junk DNA. And I think throughout time, we've adapted out of certain things, like being able to see ultraviolet light. I think in the ancient past, when we started taking fire indoors and not needing your night vision to stand sentry over the one sleeping, that we adapted out of being able to see it. It's a huge loss to humanity, really, because the world is so much more beautiful if you can see an ultraviolet light. It's everything looks like Avatar. Like you can see extra patterns on flower petals, even like a mundane thing like a daisy. If you put ultraviolet on a daisy, you can see extra little runways that the flower will indicate to bees to get them attracted to it.
So that's funny as well. So before we went live, you and I were talking. I told you I'd recently purchased these dicyanin goggles, right, from Museum of Tarot. And for anybody who doesn't know, we don't have to dive into that topic necessarily. They can look that up, and it's something I'll get into on the show in the future. But one of the things I did notice the other day, and at first I thought that this was some kind of glitch in my matrix with my eyes, etc., as I'm wearing these things on the way home from work. My dad's driving the truck. I'm looking out the window because I'm doing the thing. I'm trying to learn how to use these things. And when the vehicle's moving, it's very hard to focus. But you could, on the trees, see, this line of energy, typically along the tree and along the branches. And nothing here is really budded out yet. It's still too early, too late in the winter, too early in the spring. But I noticed the weird thing, and I was only seeing it on the maple trees, and I had to check 3 or 4 times. But it was like I'd go by a maple tree, and it was almost as though you could see the outline of where the maple leaves would be at. And then I would take the glasses off and look again, and it just looks like a maple tree. Put them back on, and it's almost as though you can see the energy outline of where that leaf would grow into. Which was
it's almost like the tree's intention of how it wants to grow.
And so that threw me a little bit, and I'm still not sure if I'm just imagining it or if it's a thing that's actually happening. So I need to spend some more time with it. But when you said that, that kind of makes sense. I mean, everything has a form and a function and some sort of memory that reminds it of what to do exactly, other than just cell memory, I think. So.
Now, there's a local Sasquatch podcast that I listen to here, and there was an episode where he interviewed Doug Hychek, and he's the producer of Monster Quest, and he was talking about their study on Sasquatch, and he tried doing a little bit of ultraviolet, and I thought that was really cool because I was already started that. But they're trying to use it to find handprints. So they're trying to bait like a softball out in the field and get the Sasquatch to actually touch it. And then they'll use it like a forensics flashlight, find the handprint.
Yeah.
And then collect DNA from what's called sebum. It's the hand oils that will be left on the ball. And I thought that was rather interesting too. Sasquatch are said to have a very oily skin,
right?
So whatever they touch, they leave a pretty milky white residue. Yeah,
interesting.
But he was saying that on a separate occasion, he was doing a nature documentary, and he was observing grizzly bears and caribou in the northern tundra. And what they observed was these animals were able to see protein and sugar content within the ultraviolet spectrum of the plants that they're eating. And that gives them the ability to not only see what's the most nutritious bang for their buck food, but they don't waste any time eating the less ready foods for them. So you're not wasting energy. I mean, essentially, you'd go into starvation if you just ate everything around you, because not everything is going to give you the energy you need. So it totally makes sense.
See, and that makes me wonder about other things as well. And this is where this podcast is going to get super dorky here. But It has to, because this is what I relate to, right? So it makes me wonder in instances of like, you know, I bred plants for years, and I'm looking for human characteristics. But one of the things that I always noticed with, and there's obviously other senses the animals are using, but one of the things I always noticed about heirloom or open pollinated or land raised corn is you can have acres and acres and acres and acres of conventional corn, whether it be GMO or hybrid or just conventional corn in general. And the animals will bypass every bit of that to find a couple of acres of open pollinated corn that exists. And it also seemed to be that they had preferences when it came to color, very much so. So one of the things that always got wiped out here was we did a lot of experiments with what was called maize morado or casuli corn, which is a Peruvian flour corn that is dark purple, very high anthocyanin, soluble in water, soluble in alcohol as well. And I never had any success with it. As a matter of fact, one year I had 2 acres of it, and I checked it one day and it was fine. And the next day, all of it, but maybe 5 stalks. I don't know if a herd of deer came through or what happened there.
Quote unquote herd of deer.
Yeah, whatever it was, wiped it out entirely. So
Something
now,
with a large stomach.
yes, now it makes me wonder about the UV with those plants, because a lot of those plants, for example, those the casuli corns and the purple corns also have purple coloration in the plants, and it makes me wonder.
Well, the coloration in the plant is completely different when you put the UV on it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's one thing that I can very easily study is plants, because it's not going to run away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And I happen to live on a farm, so I have a lot of control specimens that I can look at, like alfalfa and corn, and I live right beside a river. So I'll go out at night and I'll take my flashlight and I'm looking at known things that are nutritious.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking for that protein and sugar content. And when you look at corn itself, like cow corn, the green blades will actually turn blue, which really adds to the saying of bluegrass movement, because it actually is blue.
Mm-hmm.
Under the ultraviolet light, not to our eyes, but to everything else.
Right.
It sees blue grass. Even ditchweed grass turns blue. The new shoots will tend to go a little bit more red.
Mm-hmm.
And most new growth actually shows up very, very red in plants, which we don't see with our eyes.
Mm-hmm.
You go down to the river and you start looking around on the shore, and what you'll see is carpets of red. And all that is the algae. Very high nutritious plant that all the river creatures eat. So the redness in the plant is the indicator of the protein and sugar content. You look at alfalfa and it turns very red.
That's definitely interesting.
Now, fruits and vegetables act in a different way. I checked out some squash in the fall, and a spaghetti squash will turn this neon green blue color. Very strange. And I went to my friend's apple orchard, and I was walking around with the flashlight, and the apples will turn neon blue. They stick out like a sore thumb.
I guarantee
It's the coolest thing. I looked at a bell pepper plant, and the peppers will turn blue as well. It's the wildest thing.
I mean, it makes sense to me, and it does, you know, presuming that Sasquatch puts off this UV light and somehow it can block us from seeing it. I know there's a lot of theories on how and why that is, and I'm curious if you have any theories on why that is and how that developed. But it makes sense. There's so many stories of, like the thing I told you in the woods up here. There's so many stories of people saying that they saw something, but it was almost, you know, and it's trite to say it at this point, but it's almost like the movie Predator. Like you see the outline of something, but you're not actually seeing something, or like you heard the noise, but you didn't see the thing. It makes sense that they would have these sort of things built into them. Now, whether or not that is a defensive thing, offensive thing, or it's just that we've devolved to such a point that we aren't noticing them anymore, I don't know. But I'm curious what your take on that is.
Okay, well, what determines your ability to produce this ultraviolet light is your melanin production. So we often take ourselves out of the sunlight. I mean, mainstream will kind of tout the sun as being harmful to us, which it is definitely not. It's only harmful when you adapt out of it and you're in crisis mode. Wearing sunglasses and everything is actually detrimental because you need that color filter to be hitting your eyes in order to get it to work properly. So the melanin will come to the surface of your skin when you're in sunlight, absorb all the different spectrums of light that's coming from the sun. The most beneficial is early morning sun and late evening sun. It also helps with your circadian rhythm. It'll get your hormones to go in the proper function. And most animals will get out of the midday sun and sit in the shade, but they're still absorbing the color through their eyes from the shade. So they're still getting the benefit without having to hide indoors or anything like that. They'll just go sit somewhere and stay cool. Now, you look at descriptors of Sasquatch, and oftentimes when they describe the color of the skin, it's this dark gray ashy color, which would indicate a lot of melanin. Like a lot of melanin. And they got nothing but time. So they're sitting there absorbing all this sunlight, getting all this powerful UV energy, and they have no technology. They could be the most shamanic creature on this planet. I mean, the Tibetan monks can do phenomenal things. And we barely understand that. So I kind of think Sasquatch is the original human. The ones that opted not for technology.
Yeah, makes sense.
They're the most natural. They're very similar to us. They even share mitochondrial DNA with us. I mean, they could be an offshoot from what we are, but I kind of have a feeling that they're the original human on this planet. And what they can do, we can probably do too. It's just a matter of having your genes turned on and off. I mean, they're hairy because they don't wear clothes. I mean, we'd probably be just as hairy if we didn't have clothing. And the size is an adaptation to be able to take out their prey. You need to be big in order to take down a deer, so over time, that's what you're going to do. And I mean, especially if you keep your size from the Ice Age, because everything there was megafauna, and you'd have to be big in order to take that out. Otherwise, you're going to be prey.
Yeah.
So I think what they can do is solely based off of their genes and their melanin production. They probably sit somewhere nice and sunny and absorb all day long and then come out at night to do their hunting. When everything else is quiet and there's no humans.
Yeah, that makes as much sense as anything that I've ever heard on the subject, I think. And you know, sometimes whatever may seem to be the obvious answer is the one that we overlook, but it ends up being the totally obvious answer. You know, and I think that understanding these scientific principles that are also you know, spiritual principles as well, but spirituality just being science that we haven't yet figured out. It makes a lot of sense for that to be the case. And it makes a lot of sense for us having been able to see it in ultraviolet at one point in time. We know that humans are naturally diurnal, right? And yet we don't have greatly adapted eyes, you know, as is to twilight or dark, either one. We developed cataracts. Oh, I'm 40 and already had cataracts. That's the whole thing. So you had to have some other system by which to work off of. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that can make a lot of sense for, as you said, both the people who believe in the more woo-woo side of things and the people who are very much into the ape side of things. It's a nice starting ground to go, okay, this is a thing that, whether it's a completely physical thing or not a completely physical thing, it has some aspects to it that we don't understand, that we haven't yet comprehended, but they don't have to be so far out, that it turns people away from even looking into the possibility of this being a reality. And I think there's more than enough evidence that there's something out there. It's a real thing. It exists. So, and humans are great at hiding from other humans when they need to. I mean, we've adapted to do that very well with warfare and everything else. So it makes a lot of sense as well too, if they can shift, spectrums and things of that nature. These stories of people walking up on what they thought was a tree stump, and then the tree stump's not there, makes a lot more sense.
If you've ever seen the enhanced version of the Paul Freeman footage, slowed down, the way that Sasquatch moves in the video, it walks out in front of him, it goes behind a cedar tree, and what it does is it tilts its head forward to match the bough of the branch beside it. And when it does that, it's just disappeared.
Yeah,
and it's right in front of your face. There's a theory that their guard hairs are very much the same as a polar bear. They're translucent, so they'll pick up the color around it. So when it goes up to that tree and gets down into that position, raises its guard hairs, it's going to pick up all that green, and it's just going to disappear. And it does it beautifully on film.
It makes you wonder about some of the other cryptids that you hear often as well. So, and the big cat thing, not only in the U.S., but also in England. I mean, in the U.S.,
they just proved that with DNA.
Yeah, and it makes sense. It's always a Black Panther, right? Always a quote unquote Black Panther, and
blacker than black, which actually has a name. The scientific name for that color is Vanta Black, and it absorbs 99.5% of all visible spectrum.
That would make a lot of sense. And I mean,
so when you see a shadow man and you describe him as blacker than black, it's because it's absorbing all the ambient light around it.
And that's interesting too, because another little side branch here, but there are, in a lot of the old grimoires, there are disappearing spells, but they're not so much for disappearing as they are for turning down your lights and making you less noticeable.
Lowering your frequency.
Yep.
Now, when you think about these shadow men, and often they're described in sleep paralysis stories, and you start to factor in that we are producing light, and these things might be a parasite that are absorbing all light. They're just feeding off of what you're producing.
That's what a lot of these things do, man. That's that thing on the farm. I have no doubt the thing that we dealt with, that's exactly what it was doing, because when we weren't afraid of it anymore, it stopped. It didn't stop completely, but it's not like it was, right? Little things will happen, like the tree thing I told you about or whatever, but it's not like it was.
That could even be something completely different.
It could
be totally unrelated, but just happens to play into coincidence.
It's a distinct possibility, and I think the only reason my brain holds on to, it's almost weird, it's almost backwards. My brain holds on to thinking that it's the same thing that I dealt with, just because I got so used to it fucking with me. At one point in time, I was like, no, this has got to be that thing. Like, my brain will only handle so much high strangeness at one time, to where it's like there couldn't possibly be two weird things that are unrelated happening in the same place. But Whatever that was, I will say this. When we heard the thing on the farm, if you go back and listen to the Trickster episodes, when I shot the thing and it sounded like it was tearing through trees, or whenever the two things are out in the woods sound like they were tearing each other apart and tearing down trees, there was never any physical evidence. When I saw the thing jump from the tree to the other tree, I didn't see it, like I said, but I saw the physical response of it, including that branch bending. So there was something physical there. Now, what it was, I don't know, but whatever it was heavy enough to bend a pretty thick branch.
Sounds very good at camouflaging.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
If you want a good visualization for the light that we emit, just think of a cuttlefish. So they're those little squid octopus guys, and when they're hunting or hiding or talking with each other, they're emitting light and changing their patterns, and it's really beautiful to watch. The same thing happens within our own bodies when we're changing our emotions, when we're talking, our intentions. All of that plays out in different waves of light. You can kind of see that when you look in an MRI scan and you hook someone up and you can see their thoughts in their head. What's happening on the machine is actually transference of light between the hemispheres in the brain. It's physical light transference. It's not just, we can see their thoughts lighting up on the graph. It's a literal thing.
Right.
So, you think of service dogs and how they're trained to spot medical emergencies. Your body's going to react in such a way, cause a light pattern within your own body saying, I'm about to have a stroke or a seizure, and your dog's going to be able to see that and help you. It's the long-term belief is that it's been smell, and maybe that is a combination of it, but I think a lot of this is visual. Light communication is the most common form of communication on this planet, and we don't fully understand it because we can't get outside of our own heads.
Yeah.
So there's so much more to be explored with this whole subject. It's not just ultraviolet, it's infrared, it's positive and negative light, because some of the most primitive creatures will use polarized light in order to see as well. So think of like a film negative, and that's what it would look like.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's also the whole factor of electromagnetic frequency communication that we don't fully understand. The body creates a toroidal field around the heartbeat. So every time your heart beats, you have a pulse of energy that's going to both poles of your body, just like the Earth's magnetic field. And a lot of creatures can actually sense that. One of the most beautiful ways this is able to be envisioned is the dance between flowers and bees. Now, they're understanding that flowers can actually emit sound, so they can sing. And the bees can hear this, and the flowers can actually hear the direction in which beehives are humming at. So the flower will turn its head towards the beehive.
Bees.
And the bee will hear the flower singing to it. When the bee flies over towards the flower, it's not only going to see those runways on the flower petals in the ultraviolet, because the insects have very good UV vision. It will also sense the negative magnetic field around the flower. The bee holds a positive charge. So when the bee lands on the flower, they exchange protons and electrons. The bee will magnetize to the pollen that's in the flower. It will drink the nectar. Then that flower will go from being a negative charge to a positive charge. So when the next bee comes by, it will sense that flower's already been pollinated and it needs to go to the next flower.
Interesting. Huh. Yeah, I see. And again, my brain does the redneck thing because to where I'm from and being a farm boy. So, for example, yesterday I was having a conversation with a lady about keeping deer out of her garden, and she had talked about I don't know what you call these things, but you know those like those whirly bird things that like turn in the wind.
Yeah.
So she was putting those out to keep the deer out, and she's like, I think it's the motion and the noise that keeps them away. And I asked her, I said, well, do they have any color to them or anything? She says, yeah, they're sparkly and they have different colors on them. And it got me thinking about our previous conversation, because you can put out all kinds of things that move, make noise, etc., and it's usually not going to keep deer away. But it made me think about the light coming off of those, the reflective light, if that's not what's actually causing the effect. And
Yeah, I
keeping
mean,
them out.
deer are fairly jumpy, so any kind of fast movement like that would make them wary for sure.
Yeah.
And if it's producing anything in any kind of other light spectrum, I'm sure they see it.
And that's what I was thinking, because most of the deer here, I mean, you know, we can put all kinds of moving things out there, and they don't care. They just don't care. But
Here's a neat thing about deer and Sasquatch. Now, deer are a little bit more primitive than a predator species. They don't have the ability to see red or orange. And this is emphasized when you look at tigers hunting. So if you were to take a tiger and look at it the way a deer sees it, that orange on the tiger actually gets translated into another shade of green. So the tiger, with the bands of black and green, breaks up its image to such a degree that it's so hard to see.
wow. Yeah.
Now, what's a common color description of Sasquatch? That reddy brown color. So when you take a deer and you place it in a field and have a Sasquatch sitting beside a tree, it's going to translate to another shade of green in the forest, and they're not going to have a clue. I mean, the black ones are going to hide in the shadows, and those red-brown ones are going to be sticking in the foliage.
That makes sense too, from the running a deer as well. You know, if there's two of them working together and one of them spooking the deer out and then the other one waiting for him down the trail somewhere, makes that a whole lot easier.
Now, the reason that animals like predator species will adapt into this red color is for that reason. Mammals don't have the ability to produce green pigment. So in order to get around that and actually hide, they go red instead. I mean, even some bears will adapt into having that reddy color.
Right? Huh.
And then you think of the UV on the deer, and especially with white-tailed deer, when they put their flag up, you just see their white rear end. But if you were to look at that in the UV, like if I put my flashlight on it, it's going to look very purple.
Right.
Bright too. I mean, wear a white shirt into a nightclub and see what it looks like. It's the same thing. I mean, that's telling every deer in the field, hey, danger.
Right.
Really quickly.
Yep. Nice little flag. Yeah, so and not to get us off in another subject or get us too deep into all this stuff in one episode, but I do have to ask you, because we kind of Book of Enoch did a little bit there with the things that feed off of light. I know that there are going to be people listening to this that want to hear a little bit more of that. So if you wanted to speak on that subject for a little bit here. I know it's a deep one, and I know we don't need to go a whole nother hour or anything like that, because we can get into this down the road as well. But I think just touching on that concept momentarily might be
okay. So with the Book of Enoch and the Fallen, and how our DNA works, the mitochondrial DNA part of your body is responsible for the energy transcription within your body. Scientists only thought it was a donation from your mother and that it didn't really do anything. Well, they were wrong, and this is what translates to what protein gets doped with what metal in your body in order to open up the pathways of that light frequency traveling through your body. So we use zinc, we use calcium, we use iodine, we use magnesium, all of that. That's what your mitochondrial DNA does. And going back to our body producing light more powerful than the sun in order to achieve faster than light travel. If you were a fallen angel and you're imprisoned here on Earth, you need a way off.
Mm-hmm.
So you start seeing these hairless apes that have the ability to get off, but they don't know how to use it. So you act as a god over them.
Mm-hmm.
You trade them trinkets and technology for the opportunity to gain access to wives, to gain access to that DNA, in hopes that your children will inherit the means to get off the prison planet. I think that's the motive. I think it's the origin of the dowry. And all we see is greed for ourselves with these shiny technologies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a tale as old as time.
I hadn't even thought of the dowry thing, but that makes sense. That's it tracks.
Every one of those fallen angels brought some form of culture or technology or mathematics. They were giving you something in return for wives.
Right.
And also the promise that your grandchildren would be men of renown, leaders amongst society, the most powerful people. So you're keeping the prestige, but you're being played upon. You think you are powerful, you're just being used.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's going to take generations upon generations maybe to achieve what you want. You might not get the correct order of DNA in order to do it until finally you do.
Right. And all those things in between could very well be generational curses as we know them as well. So that's there you go, Andy. We got primitive human Bigfoot, and we also got some fallen angel Enoch shit in the same episode, Casper Zach. So he's gonna be so happy. He's gonna call me when he hears this. He's gonna be like, dude, that was awesome. Dude, this
the ancient Babylonians actually called ultraviolet angel vision.
I like that. Angel vision. That's cool. That's cool.
Now we want to go really woo. One of the reasons that I got into the ultraviolet is I actually had a vision that showed me ultraviolet. Mm-hmm. I saw a great Egyptian tomb, and from the floor to your waist height was visible hieroglyphics, just like any other Egyptian tomb. And from the waist up, it was this glowing lettering that was only visible in the ultraviolet spectrum. And I heard a voice that said, "You have eyes to see, but you do not see, ears to hear, but you do not hear."
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very multifaceted message, because not only is it showing there's this whole world out there that you have no idea is right in front of your eyes, including frequencies. You can't hear them, but everything else can. Mm-hmm. But you can spread your message all you want, but the people that are gonna need that information are gonna hear it and see it, and the others that aren't ready for it aren't.
Doesn't matter what you say to them in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, that's the esoteric of the esoteric. It's very small percentage.
Every message is more than just the straightforward. There's always multifacets.
Well, and and you know this, but the powers that be or maybe sometimes even the more rebellious of the people who would be the powers that be. They let things slip through. A lot of times, just like with dark magic, you know, they're telling you what they're going to do long before they ever do it. They may not tell you exactly what they're going to do, but they will sort of lead you along. And so we get those little glimpses sometimes in popular culture, and a great example of it was a movie that was lost on most people was Prometheus. You know, I find it very interesting that the people who really got that movie and the people who still talk about that movie, and I only bring this up because of what you just mentioned with your vision, the people who really got that movie are the people like us that are like, no, I see exactly what you did there, Ridley Scott. And then everybody else is like, what the hell was that? It wasn't an alien movie. It wasn't intended to be in any way, shape, or form. You know, there's a reason all the interiors look dark and drab. There's also a reason that the engineer's eyes are black. They're not seeing the same things that we are seeing. What they're seeing is likely very colorful compared to everything that we're seeing. And all the way down to the android actually finding the writings on the wall and all of that stuff and being able to decipher their language. So
on that note, if you look within the same universe and you look at the predator, and when it's hunting, it will change different visual spectrums in order to see different prey. It will hunt the humans in infrared, and if it's hunting the alien, it changes to another spectrum in the helmet to even see it. And that right there is telling you that not everything that we see is within the same spectrum.
Yep. Little pieces of the mystery just sort of peppered throughout popular culture, and not very many people ever seem to kind of put them together, pull them out, and then apply that to the various things that have been told to us throughout the millennia. And you know, the books are just about like movies are. You know, even if you go back, the further you go back, doesn't necessarily make them any more clear than what the modern day media is. So I don't know. These are the kind of things these are the conversations that I want to drive this show very heavily, because they're the conversations that aren't out there easy to access, right? So I really appreciate you coming and doing this and getting into this stuff with us, and I think we have an opportunity to dive into a lot more stuff with you in the future as well, because
for sure
you're doing the deep dives on the stuff, and you're very good at explaining those things to the listeners, and that's something that I appreciate. So,
well, thanks, Alan. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I look forward to having you back, and tell people where they can find you and find some of the other podcasts you've been on and that kind of stuff. Anything you got coming up you want them to know about?
Well, you can easily find me on Instagram as Chucky_danger, and you can see some of my research that I've done with the ultraviolet flashlight. I have a lot of my plant photos on there and pictures that I've taken from other research showing the animals in their ultraviolet fashion. You can also listen to me now regularly on the Countercult podcast. So you can join us there every Tuesday. That can be found on Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on Rumble. So that would be the best places.
That's great, man. I'm glad you got a platform like that. You got a regular spot on. That's fantastic, man. Because you got a lot to share with the world. So, keep us up to date on all the UV stuff as you continue to delve into this and study it. Because I think you're kind of pushing the cutting edge of what people are doing on that home level, for sure.
Well, like I said, it's such a new science that we're only scraping the surface of what's even possible. I mean, as the cameras develop, things will get easier, but even just going out with the handheld flashlight, you can discover phenomenal things.
Oh, I'm going to be burning you up with questions on the flashlight, because as soon as I talked to you the other day, I went out and I was talking to Kim. I'm like, hey, need you to order a UV flashlight. And she just looks at me and I'm like, just order the flashlight. I'll tell you later.
You're going to have a lot of fun with it, especially with the kids.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the flower thing alone is interesting enough to us because, we grow all kinds of flowers outside. And I'd be very curious to see one that came to mind for me. I'll just throw this out to you. So two, actually. Moonflower, which is usually white or blue. should be pretty cool to take a look at. And then
yeah.
also, my favorite flower of all time is the 4 o'clock. And it blooms at twilight, so that's going to be a fun one. To play
My
with.
favorite is the angel trumpet.
The Chura. Yeah.
And it also blooms at night. And I took photos of it, and that's on my Instagram as well. And you'll be able to see the difference.
Makes a little DMT as well. So, it's an interesting plant for sure. Yeah, that's
not that I'm taking it for that. It's
and I'm not advising anyone to try to make DMT from Angel's Trumpet either. Don't try.
No, you're going to get messed up if you do that.
Is it DMT or is it LSA? I can't remember. It's one of the two. Maybe LSA.
I think it's DMT.
Could be. I'd have to look back into it.
I know it's very poisonous if you have too much.
Yeah. It's actually a major concern for bourbon distillers because it's an endemic weed all across the Midwest. So,
oh really?
You want to keep the seed out of your fermentation at all costs. So,
wow.
There's a fun, useless fact for everyone.
There you go.
So, well, all right, brother, we're gonna wrap this up, and I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.